documentary about exactly about what the people have been telling us.
What are the main points of view that you will be raising in this documentary?
Okay, so the main points is basically to deconstruct the main fabrications that have been put forward by the global media, mainly the Western media and channels, particularly Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. And these fabrications are that the army is on a mass scale, systematic scale, killing peaceful protesters, that there is no democracy in Syria, that there is no respect for human rights, and that there is no support for President Bashar Al-Assad. So the documentary deals with all of these fabrications and in effect shows that actually in many of the cases they're just complete and outright lies.
You said that these are fabrications. For many of our viewers and people who will be watching us, when they hear the word fabrication, they would say, why would a TV channel, a leading TV channel, mainstream Arab media, fabricate news about Syria? Okay. And actually more than one. When you see 5, 6 or 7 news outlets doing the same coverage, how would you explain that if they're fabrications, as you call them?
Okay, well, it's quite clear that in the West and in certain Arab countries, that the media is inseparable from the state, the government. So, for example, it's well known that the BBC is funded by the British state, Al Jazeera is funded by the Qatari state. So, in effect, it's very naive, actually, to think that these news organizations will report in a way that contradicts the foreign policy of their country. So we know very well that Qatar has been calling for foreign intervention in Syria very openly.
And very active in it, actually.
Has been very active, just as they did in Libya. I mean, what I'm talking about now applies exactly to Libya also. Britain, the NATO countries have also been pushing for intervention inside Syria. So it is actually the role of the media of these countries to provide a narrative that supports intervention inside Syria. So really it is naive to think that these organizations are independent and that they have the ability to be objective. They are not independent and they have to serve the foreign policy interests.
So based on what you're saying, if the BBC is funded by the United Kingdom, if Al Jazeera is funded by the Qatari government, if Al Arabiya is funded by the Saudi government, France 24, French government, and so on, so on, so on. So these are a translation of the policies of these governments and not free journalism.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's something very interesting for me that recently we've seen a shift in the coverage regarding events in Syria. Up to a certain point, no media outlets would acknowledge the presence of gunmen in protests in Syria. Everyone was saying that this is peaceful protest, that the security and the army is systematically, according to them, killing peaceful protesters. But when the observers, the Arab League observers, entered Syria, and for some reason the insurgents and the presence of insurgents became undeniable, we've seen a shift in coverage. They started justifying the presence of insurgents and justifying militants. Why do you think?
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, as you said, at the beginning there was completely no acknowledgement that the government was fighting against armed insurgents. It was all about the government attacking peaceful protesters.
Yes.
But as you say, now it's because of the Arab League have begun to acknowledge the presence. It has become impossible for this to be denied. And as you rightly say, there is the danger now that these armed groups are being legitimized. And I think this is becoming, this is because the NATO countries and other countries like Qatar, etc., they have been unsuccessful in pushing for intervention in the way that they want to do it, like via how they did in Libya, via the United Nations Security Council. And so now they are looking to, I think they are looking to, in creating this organization which they call the Free Syrian Army, which I don't agree with the name of that, the name of that organization, but they're effectively trying to say that the Free Syrian Army or the armed insurgents are legitimate, and therefore it is legitimate for us to support them. And this is a very dangerous road to go down. It's a blatant violation of the sovereignty of a independent nation.
But even media outlets, let's take Reuters for example, they issued a report recently saying that only 3% of the so-called Free Army is made of army deserters, and the rest is people who are wanted, or people who are wanted for prior crimes, or people who are simply thugs and they are bearing arms against the government. How do we judge these media outlets? We say they're not objective, they're not, but they're saying something which agrees with what's happening on the ground.
Yes, so on the one hand, this is what they're doing, and then on the other hand, they are still providing manipulative coverage on events in Syria. It's quite arrogant, actually, that they can come out and provide these reports, being honest about what is happening, but at the same time, they're not being critical about this. They're still facilitating hostility against the Syrian government. And really, I just think it's quite an arrogant approach towards covering the events in Syria.
As a percent, what percent did media contribute to the Syrian crisis, do you think?
At least above 90%. I mean,
90%.
It's clear that without the media, the media's involvement in this conflict, the events would have been over perhaps before they started. The reports at the beginning that the government was attacking peaceful protesters were crucial, I think, in mobilizing, in inflaming the situation inside Syria.
But many people say, why don't the Syrian government allow more journalists in? They allowed many journalists in. More than 160 news crews have entered Syria recently, actually, and many before in this crisis. But what do you think about the calls to allow journalists to enter Syria?
Well, as I said before, that the global media organizations are not separate from their governments. So there's first of all, I'd like to say that in Britain, if there was a similar crisis happening in Britain, it would be impossible. It would just be unheard of that if, for example, Britain was facing an aggression by, for example, Iran, it would be unheard of that Britain would be allowing Iranian media in the country, which is going to be critical of the British government. And indeed, even at a time of peace, when Britain isn't under threat from Iran, just a few days ago, Britain closed down the Iranian channel in English, which is an unprecedented move. It's the first time they've closed down an international channel. And it's evident that the reason that they're doing this is because they can't stand to have an Iranian voice in the English language. So really, I think that actually it's very generous of the Syrian government to be letting any journalists into the country at all. Not only do they support the narrative of military intervention, but also it's been well documented, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's well known and anybody can look into it, that media organizations, journalistic teams that come into countries like Syria and other countries that are facing war are embedded with intelligence. It's a very cheap way for imperialist countries to have eyes and ears on the ground when they can't send in, for example, special forces, which of course they do anyway. It happened in Syria, it happened in Libya, and it's happening now in Syria. And if I can talk quickly about the case of Gilles Jacquier in Homs.
The France 2 reporter who was killed in Homs by insurgents. Exactly.
Shortly after he was killed, French media organizations were accusing the government of killing Gilles Jacquier. Actually, it's very complicated, and I can't go into a lot of the details because we don't have time. But before Gilles Jacquier came on the first delegation, France 2 sent a letter, and it's on the internet, this is all available for the public to see, sent a letter to the Syrian Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Information requesting that Gilles Jacquier be embedded with the Syrian military. And of course the Syrian government laughed at this and rejected it because it's a very sensitive area for a French person to be,
or a foreigner to be affiliated with the Syrian army.
Even a Syrian person.
Even for a civilian, yes.
So there's also the Iranian engineers that were captured in Homs on December the 20th. Yes. Nobody knows what happened to them. It's very strange that a French magazine on January the 5th published pictures of these Iranian engineers, which shows that, the French magazine was Paris Match, which shows that they have contact, at least, with the people who have captured
with the insurgents,
the engineers.
Yes.
So when Gilles Jacquier was supposed to come, he came with his supposed girlfriend, a woman called Caroline Poiron, who is a photographer for Paris Match. When they went to Homs, it's well known that they were meant to be going to meet with opposition figures, and actually they requested that their Lebanese translator didn't accompany them later on when they were supposed to be going to either Baba Amara or Baba Spar. Why didn't they want her to accompany them? Obviously, there's something that they didn't want her to see. But then, of course, he was killed in an attack. Georges Malbruno from Le Figaro immediately accused the government. But then when evidence started to come out that actually Gilles Jacquier was a part of the military intelligence for the French, and of course this can't be proven conclusively, but there is evidence to suggest that.
But Le Figaro itself said that Gilles Jacquier was killed by an insurgency attack.
Exactly. So when the evidence started to come out to suggest that he wasn't who he said he was, then Le Figaro said that he was killed by insurgents. This is an extraordinary admission by the French, and actually they quoted some Free Army officials as saying this. So not only are the Free Army admitting to killing Gilles Jacquier, but they're also admitting to killing 8 Syrian civilians. Exactly,
which no one wants to speak about. They only want to speak about the French journalists.
Absolutely.
However, moving on to Libya, you were in Libya, you covered the events in Libya. What similarities do you find between the insurgency in Libya and the insurgency in Syria?
There are many similarities. There are, of course, many differences between the situations here and Libya, but in terms of
I'm just speaking about the aspect of insurgents, how they're managed, how the media cover their news and their activities.
Yeah.
Because in Libya, there has been something very interesting. They always told us that the so-called rebels they're strong, they're determined, they want to do things, but every day we would hear about them losing more ground to government forces, and it wasn't until the NATO intervened, and it wasn't until the NATO intervened very strongly, actually bombing cities and everything that stands in the way. They weren't able to gain any ground from the government.
Yeah, well, of course, the media completely labeled these people revolutionaries, freedom fighters. But as we know, it's a similar situation in Libya. It's clear that they have strong links to Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups. You're absolutely right in saying that they were in complete disarray, the rebels, and we can see that now actually in the way that there are many hundreds of different militias. There's no unity between these people, and they were completely incapable of doing anything without NATO. This is a fact. In terms of the other similarities in the media coverage, the media very much portrayed as though they had popular support. But actually, I was there, and I met a lot of refugees from places where they were heavily embedded, like Benghazi and Misrata. People, thousands of people who had fled these areas because they were committing atrocities against the civilian population. And so to say that, of course, we saw footage of protests, with these rebels, similar to how we are seeing now in Syria. But in order to look at those images and say that that is popular support, when we can also see the atrocities that these people are committing, is it support or is it fear? That is a judgment to be made. But the media was completely unquestioning about this, and they completely ignored the refugees, despite that they were there in Tripoli when I was there, and they were meeting these refugees, but they completely ignored them.
But many people would say like these are separate cases. They don't represent the whole militia or the whole armed rebels, as you call them. Why do you want to label the whole thing as they're committing atrocities against civilians?
I don't really understand the
scale. Why isn't, you said that you've seen violations of human rights committed by the armed rebels in Libya. But many people from other media outlets, they would say, yes, there have been atrocities, and they would say it's separate cases, like what happens in Homs right now in Syria. When insurgents kill civilians, they attack buses, they attack public buses, they abduct girls, and they rape girls, and they say, oh, but look, this is a separate case, this is not just the general case. How would you respond to something like this?
I mean, the atrocities that were committed were widespread. For example, from the beginning of the crisis in Libya, there was a policy of systematically targeting, in particular, black Libyans and other African migrants. And this was systematic. And we saw that when Tripoli fell, supposedly, or when NATO bombed the rebels into Tripoli, that we saw images, and the mainstream media couldn't ignore it, of dozens of black Libyans and other migrants
arrested,
being
detained,
captured and put on pickup trucks tied to poles. So to say that this is just an unfortunate consequence of the rebel is really naive and ignoring what is in front of your eyes and trying to whitewash the situation. If, for example, a Syrian soldier, legitimate Syrian soldier, kills a civilian, perhaps by accident, perhaps not, then the whole army is tarred with targeting civilians. So why the double standards? Exactly. So why the double standards?
And you've said something very interesting. You said that insurgents didn't enjoy support. They enjoyed. They didn't command respect. They commanded fear.
Yeah.
Among the people. But some people would say, let's keep the insurgents, give them time to work within the people, and the people would reject them eventually. The people will refuse to cooperate with them. The people would report them and turn them in.
Okay, of course there are some elements of Libyan society that did support the armed insurgents. I believe that they weren't, they were perhaps a little bit naive about who they were. But now, if you look just yesterday, there was a big protest in Benghazi. Where I think there was something like 4,000 people protesting outside the NTC headquarters. Mustafa Abdul Jalil's car was attacked, and I believe he was holed up in the building for about 4 hours. And there were many reports coming out where people were quoted as saying, we fought for this so-called revolution, but actually probably things would have were better.
So, in your opinion, where are things going on the ground based on what you have seen in your recent stay in Syria?
Well, it's clear that there is a lot of popular support for the president here. There is a lot of, I get the sense that the people here are extremely tired with the crisis and want a quick resolution to the situation. But at the same time, I'm quite cynical because with the external parties, in particular Turkey and the Lebanese, continuing to provide logistical and financial...
Some parties,
yes, of course, support to these groups, then there's a big danger that the destabilization of the country will escalate. And at the same time, I don't have any faith that the West will take the pressure off. Syria is very important for them in terms of the later confrontations with Iran, Russia and China. But then, of course, Syria is in a much stronger position than, for example, Libya, because of the support of the Russians in particular, and also the Iranians. So there is, of course, some aspects that give me a lot of hope, but there is also many things that make me quite cynical.
But also, if we speak about the media coverage, do you think there is any turning back? It seems that the media have went too far in portraying events in a certain way that they can't go back right now.
Well, there have been, as we mentioned before, there have been some more positive kind of, in terms of from a Syrian government point of view, reports. For example, there was a report in The Guardian a few days ago which completely omitted that there was a lot of popular support for President Assad.
And there are fabricated YouTube footages that are being misused.
Exactly. A few months ago, we never would have seen anything like that in The Guardian. So this is a positive development. But at the same time, as you say, the media has gone so far that it's very difficult for them to actually begin to be honest, because then they have to admit that they've been lying.
Is there any turning back from here? Can they turn back and say, oh, look, we've made a mistake, we will change the way we're covering things?
They will never do that, especially while the West still wants war. As I said, the media's job in the West is to promote the foreign policy of their governments. If the West decides to take the pressure off, then they will find a way to get out of this hole that they've put themselves in. But they will never, of course, they will never admit that they've been lying.
If we speak about strategically about the events here in Syria, we're facing a situation where a great deal of misinformation is being prompted by many media outlets. How do you think we should deal with this in the future?
Well, for the Syrian people, it's very important for them to have a strong consciousness about the agenda of external parties in particular, and the media. But the crisis such as these and the one in Libya shows the importance of developing countries that are under attack from the West to develop extremely effective media that can counter the overwhelming power that the Western media and organizations like Al Jazeera have, and not just in their own languages but also in other languages, because no matter how much how many people you have telling the truth. It's sad to say that just the sheer marketing power of organizations like BBC, CNN and Al Jazeera, no matter how many times they're proved to have lied, people will always believe them because they have this strong brand and marketing power.
And this is a very important question. Why do people continue to believe these channels, though they have been proven to be lying in various occasions? CNN declared that it has broadcasted footage from Syria that was untrue. Not only that, they broadcasted footage of the Syrian army attacking towns, while in fact it was footage of the Syrian army being attacked by insurgents in some areas. They acknowledged this, and yet people still believe them. Al Jazeera also, in many occasions, they lied. The case of Zainab al-Hosni, they said she was killed, she was alive. Why do people keep believing these channels?
I call it because of Western cultural supremacy, and that, you know, unfortunately, we are so, the culture of the West is so deeply embedded in people's minds and hearts that even though we know that it's lying, because it looks a certain way and because we've grown up believing that this is right, essentially it's brainwashing. And as I said, it's the power of marketing. You know, people spend a lot of money understanding how to make people believe that black is white and white is black. So it's very important that countries like Syria, Russia, China and other countries that face this kind of propaganda also invest in marketing to be able to counter that.
Well, they established channels. The Iranians have the Press TV channel. Syrian TV has service in foreign languages. Russia has Russia Today. Latin America has Tilsur. But for some reason, we're not seeing any progress, anything developed on the ground. Yeah,
but while these channels produce very good content and perhaps more objective reporting, more honest reporting, again it comes down to marketing. They don't invest so heavily in the marketing and the brand because they believe that the content of their work will shine through, but unfortunately this isn't the case.
You paint a very dark image. Journalists who are associated with intelligence services, channels who are carrying out foreign policies of their countries and unaware and maybe uncaring public opinion. Is there any light at the end of that tunnel?
Well, we have to learn from these situations, you know, and as I said, we have to build our own. We can't rely on other countries' media to tell. So I'm saying us, but of course it's you. The Syrian people can't rely on other countries' media to tell their story. You have to have your own voice, and you have to. But really, you have to learn what is happening, and you have to understand what is happening and why it is happening. Why are we not focusing on Bahrain? Why are we not focusing on the protests in Saudi Arabia? And this is because of imperialism and the imperialist control of global media and global culture, and you know, the global economy.
Hoping that we would overcome this crisis and take some of the advice that you have spoken about into consideration and into action. Thank you very much, Lizzie Phelan, a journalist from the United Kingdom, for being with us in tonight's edition of Overseas.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for you, our viewers, thank you for being with us in tonight's edition of Overseas. Hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.